Welcome to Rain Narrator Channel, where we take you on a journey of deep relaxation and complete tranquility, with the sound of raindrops adding an atmosphere of tranquility and comfort. Relax, enjoy, and prepare to enter the world of dreams. If you are looking for an ideal way to relax or calm your mind before sleep, you are in the right place. Follow us to get the best stories. I'll tell you a story of love, trust, and the kind of heartbreak that leaves you questioning everything. It starts like any love story might, with sparks, laughter, and the feeling of two souls connecting in a way that makes the world feel like it's aligned perfectly. Her name was Lily, and she was everything to me. We met in high school, our paths crossing in the most ordinary way at a party, but from the moment we spoke, something clicked. We were the couple everyone admired, the ones who seemed destined to be together forever. Time passed. We both went to college, separate schools, which wasn't easy, but we made it work. We always said we had something stronger than distance, and for years I believed it. I'd drive to see her every weekend, surprising her with flowers or small gifts, and she'd have that smile, the kind that made the whole day feel worth it. We'd talk for hours about our future, about the dreams we had and the life we wanted to build together. But then the gap between us began to feel wider, even though we were still communicating. I could feel it, the subtle change in the air, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Lily, my Lily, was still my best friend, the person who knew me better than anyone else in the world. She'd always been supportive, loving, kind, and I was sure she was just going through some personal stuff, things that would resolve in time. It wasn't until the summer, after my final year of college, that I came back home for a break. Lily and I had agreed to spend the summer together, but when I arrived, I could tell something was off. There was an awkwardness, a distance I couldn't understand. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just adjusting to being back in the same town after spending the year at her university. But as the days went by, it became clearer. She wasn't the same. I tried to talk to her about it, asking if there was something wrong, but every time she would give me some vague excuse about being stressed or tired. It wasn't like her at all. She was always open, always honest with me. I tried not to push, but the weight of it pressed on my chest, and the doubt began to fester. Then one evening I came over to her place, surprising her with a home-cooked meal. She didn't expect it. Her face lit up when she saw me, but there was something in her eyes that wasn't quite right, something distant. I set the food down. We sat down at the table, and we talked about the usual things, how her family was, how the summer was going. But in the back of my mind, I kept hearing that nagging feeling, a voice telling me that something wasn't right. And then it happened. I found it by accident. It wasn't intentional. I never meant to pry. But as I helped Lily clean up the kitchen, my eyes landed on her phone, face down on the counter. The screen lit up. A message popped up from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The message read, "I miss you too. Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again soon." I froze, my mind went blank. The world spun around me as I read those words over and over again. It didn't make sense. She had been distant, yes, but I never thought there was someone else. The pieces didn't add up, and yet everything in that moment seemed to make sense in a way that terrified me. I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. I had to process what I was feeling, what this meant. But as the days went on, the truth gnawed at me. I needed to know. I needed answers. So one night, when we were alone in her apartment, I finally asked her. I had rehearsed it in my mind, but when the words left my mouth, they felt foreign. "Lily, I saw the message. What's going on?" She went pale. Her eyes darted to the floor, and for a moment she didn't say anything. The silence between us stretched painfully long. Then finally she spoke. "I never wanted you to find out this way," she whispered, her voice trembling. I was scared of losing you." I felt my heart drop into my stomach as she continued. "While you were away, I met someone. It wasn't planned, it just happened. I didn't want it to, but I didn't know how to stop it. It was a mistake, a huge mistake, but I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't want to hurt you." The words stung more than I could ever imagine. Every part of me wanted to scream, to shout at her, to demand how this could happen. But I couldn't. Instead, I felt this crushing weight in my chest. And the silence that followed was more deafening than any argument could have been. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, I really do." But I got lost and I don't know how to fix this. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to yell, to tell her that she had broken something that was irreplaceable. I wanted to ask her how she could betray me like this, but all that came out was a broken whisper. Why? She looked at me, her face contorted in guilt and sorrow. I don't have an answer. I didn't think I could lose you. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. We spent the rest of the evening in a heavy silence. I couldn't bring myself to leave, but I couldn't stay either. I couldn't understand how this could happen, how someone who loved me could betray that love so deeply. When I finally left her apartment that night, I felt like I was walking through a fog. My thoughts were tangled, confused. The next few days were a blur. Lily reached out, of course. She apologized endlessly, promised she'd do whatever it took to make things right. But how could things ever be right again? How could I look at her the same way after this? I loved her, I really did. But trust, once broken, was something I didn't know how to rebuild. Eventually, we agreed to take a break, something neither of us wanted, but something that felt necessary. I needed space to process everything, to figure out if I could ever forgive her, or if this was the end of us. I won't lie, part of me wanted to walk away for good. I had every right to. But another part of me, the part that still loved her deeply, wondered if it was possible to move forward. I didn't have an answer back then. And even now, months later, I still don't know if I'll ever find one. What I do know is that love is fragile, and once broken, it's never quite the same. But maybe that's what makes us human. How we try, how we heal, how we love again, even when it feels impossible. Her name was Olivia. From the moment I saw her, something inside me shifted. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but I knew I was falling for her. And I knew it was going to change everything. I met her at a party, just another one of those college get-togethers where you meet a lot of people, most of whom you forget by the next week. But not her. She stood out in the crowd like a star against the dark. I remember how her laughter seemed to fill the room, and how I couldn't stop staring at her, wishing I could somehow get closer. I was shy, and it took me a while to get the courage to talk to her. But eventually I did. And when I did, it was like I'd known her forever. It felt so natural, so right. We talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories about our childhoods, our dreams for the future, the things we liked, and the things we didn't. We clicked. She became my favorite person, my go-to when life felt overwhelming, and soon we were inseparable. It didn't take long before we were officially a couple. It felt like the world was on fire and we were the only two people who mattered. Olivia was everything I ever wanted, everything I never knew I needed. Her kindness, her intelligence, the way she could make me laugh even when I was feeling down, it was magical. We would spend hours together, lost in conversations, walks, and simple moments that felt extraordinary with her. But then one night everything started to shift, and I couldn't understand why. I've always been close with my best friend, Jake. We've been through a lot together, school, sports, breakups, and all the other stuff life throws at you. Jake was like a brother to me, and I trusted him completely. He was the kind of friend who would drop everything for you if you needed him, the kind of guy who had your back no matter what. But as the months went by, I started noticing some small things that seemed off. It was little things at first. Jake being distant when he usually wasn't. Olivia acting strange whenever I was around them together. Like there was something she wasn't saying, but I brushed it off. I was busy, we were all busy, and maybe I was just overthinking things. Olivia would tell me everything was fine, and Jake would always reassure me that nothing was wrong. But still, the nagging feeling stayed with me. There was something in the air that didn't feel right. Then one night I walked in on something I wish I never had to see. I had been at work late, and as I came home early in the morning, I wasn't expecting anyone to be up. But as I walked through the door, I heard voices from the living room. It was quiet at first, almost like a whisper, and when I stepped closer, I saw them, Olivia and Jake. They were sitting close on the couch, too close. At first, I thought maybe they were just talking. Maybe I was overreacting. But then Olivia leaned in and kissed Jake. I felt like the floor dropped out from beneath me. The air seemed to vanish, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't process it. And then they pulled away from each other, and Olivia saw me standing there, my eyes wide, my heart sinking. Her face went pale and she immediately stood up, her hand shaking. I didn't mean for you to see this, she said, her voice trembling. Jake looked at me, his face filled with guilt. And I could see it in his eyes. He knew he had crossed a line. He knew he had betrayed me. But even then, I couldn't understand why. Man, I didn't want this to happen, he said quietly. But it had happened. And in that moment, everything changed. I don't know how long I stood there just staring at them, trying to make sense of the mess in front of me. Olivia kept apologizing, her words falling on deaf ears. She tried to explain, tried to tell me that it didn't mean anything, that it was a mistake, that she still loved me. But it didn't matter. I couldn't hear her anymore. I couldn't hear anything over the sound of my own heart breaking. Jake was my best friend. I trusted him. And Olivia, she was the girl I thought I was going to spend my life with, the person I thought would always be by my side. But both of them had betrayed me. And in that moment, it felt like the world had shattered. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't look at them. Couldn't listen to their excuses, their apologies. I just turned and left, walking out into the night, without knowing where I was going or how I was going to get through this. The streets felt cold and the city around me felt distant. I didn't know who to be angry with, Olivia, Jake, or myself. Maybe all of us. I spent the next few days in a haze. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't want to see anyone. I couldn't face my friends, couldn't face the reality of what had happened. Olivia called, texted, begged me to talk to her, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up the phone. Jake tried to reach out, but I blocked his number. It hurt too much to even hear their voices. I needed space, I needed time to figure things out. But more than anything, I just needed to stop feeling so worthless. I eventually came to terms with it, or at least I tried. I learned that sometimes even the people you trust the most can betray you. And sometimes love doesn't work out the way you thought it would. I had to let go of the idea of who I thought Olivia was, of who I thought Jake was. It wasn't easy, but I had to rebuild myself from the ground up. Olivia and I never spoke again after that night. She tried to reach out, but I kept my distance. It hurt, but I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. And Jake, we're not friends anymore. Maybe one day I'll forgive him, but not now. Not yet. In the end, I learned that love isn't always as perfect as it seems. Sometimes it falls apart and you're left picking up the pieces. But I also learned that I'm stronger than I thought, and I'll keep moving forward, even if it's one step at a time. As for the future, I don't know yet. But I'm still here, still learning, still growing, and maybe, just maybe, someday I'll find someone who won't break my heart. I always thought I was a man who had everything figured out. You know the type, and the guy who works hard, keeps his emotions in check, and knows where he's headed. I had plans, I had goals, but none of that seemed to matter when she walked into my life. Her name was Ava. I remember the first time I saw her, and it was at a friend's party. She was laughing with a group of people, but there was something different about her. A warmth, maybe, or an energy I couldn't explain. Her smile lit up the room, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. I didn't even realize how long I was staring until one of my friends nudged me, grinning. "Go talk to her, man." And so I did. It was simple, really. We talked for hours. About life, our dreams, the little things that always felt bigger than they should. I learned that she loved reading, was passionate about art, and she had this quiet intensity that made me feel like she was always thinking about something deeper than what was on the surface. We clicked instantly. From there, everything moved quickly. Maybe too quickly, but at the time I didn't care. We saw each other nearly every day, and soon it felt like we were inseparable. She was beautiful, smart, and kind. Everything I ever wanted in a partner. We started talking about the future, about building something together. And I began imagining a life with her. I could picture it all, us buying a house, maybe having kids, growing old together. I know it sounds cliche, but when you know, right? Things were perfect for a long time. Every day felt like a new adventure. She made me laugh, made me think, and made me feel more alive than I ever had before. I believed she felt the same way. It was as if we were two halves of a whole, complementing each other in ways I couldn't have imagined before she came into my life. But I never saw the cracks. I don't know when it started, but there was something off. Little things, a delay in her responses to my messages, a change in how she looked at me sometimes. It was nothing major, but enough to make me feel uneasy. Maybe I was just overthinking it. I mean, we all get busy, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then one day I decided to surprise her. I was going to pick her up from work, take her to her favorite restaurant, and tell her how much I loved her. Maybe it was an impulse, maybe it was meant to be. But as I pulled into the parking lot of her office building, I saw something that would change everything. There, right in front of me, was Ava, but she wasn't alone. She was standing with another man, her hand resting on his arm. They were talking, laughing, the kind of laughter I used to hear when it was just the two of us. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to storm over there, but my feet wouldn't move. I just sat in my car, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was I overreacting? Was I misinterpreting it? I watched as they said goodbye and he kissed her on the cheek before walking away. She smiled and waved at him, then turned around to head back inside. I didn't follow her. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the empty space in front of me, my mind racing. My heart ached. I spent the rest of the evening trying to process everything. Should I confront her? I wanted to, but I didn't have the words, the courage. I spent days running over that moment in my head, trying to piece together the meaning of what I had seen. I didn't know if I was being paranoid or if something was actually wrong. But deep down I knew that what I saw couldn't just be ignored. Finally, a few days later, I couldn't take it anymore. I called her and I asked her to meet me. We went to the park, the place where we first kissed. I remember the way the sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow on everything. It felt like the perfect place for a heart-to-heart. Is there something you're not telling me, Ava? I asked her, my voice low, barely above a whisper. I didn't want to accuse her. I didn't want to hurt her, but the doubt was eating me alive. She froze for a moment, then looked away, avoiding my gaze. I could feel my chest tighten. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. Ava, I saw you with him, I said. The guy in the parking lot. Who was he? She went quiet, and for a long time she didn't answer. I didn't know what to think. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but all I could do was wait. And finally she spoke. I didn't want to hurt you, she began, her voice breaking. But I've been seeing him for a while. It's been months. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the world was spinning out of control. I'd been living a lie. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I thought I loved, had been seeing someone else behind my back. My mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. I'm sorry, she continued, tears streaming down her face. I never meant for it to go this far, but I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't want to lose you, but I couldn't let him go either. The words hit me like a freight train. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her that she had ruined everything, that she betrayed me in the worst way possible. But another part of me just felt numb, like I was drifting, disconnected from everything around me. I don't know what to say, I finally whispered. I thought we were building something together, Ava. I thought we were happy. We were, she replied, voice barely audible. But I made a mistake. I should have been honest with you from the start. I didn't know how to respond. There was nothing to say that would make sense of it. I loved her, but I also felt betrayed in a way I never imagined possible. We left the park that day, and though she tried to explain, I couldn't listen anymore. I walked away from her, from us, and it felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. The days after that were a blur. I broke up with her. Though she tried to apologize, to explain, I couldn't bring myself to forgive her, not then. Maybe someday, but not then. Weeks went by and I tried to focus on my work, my friends, and just moving on. It was hard, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Ava and I no longer spoke, though I often found myself thinking about what could have been. Sometimes I even caught myself wondering about that other man. What was so special about him? Did she love him? Had I never been enough? Then a few months later, she reached out to me. She asked if we could meet, and I agreed. Though my heart wasn't sure if it was ready. She looked different, calmer somehow, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. I've learned a lot, she said. About myself, about relationships, and about you. I can't take back what I did, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I've ended things with him. You were always the one I wanted, but I was too afraid to face the truth. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said quietly. But I don't hate you, Ava. I loved you. And that still matters to me, somewhere deep down. She nodded, and there was a kind of peace between us. But it wasn't the same as before. It could never be the same. We said goodbye that day, and I walked away, knowing that some things are meant to be left in the past. I learned a lot from that experience. I learned that love isn't always perfect. Sometimes it breaks you, sometimes it's painful, but in the end it makes you stronger. And as I look back now, I don't regret loving her, but I don't regret letting her go either. Some chapters in life close for a reason. I was 23 when I first left for work abroad. The company offered me an opportunity I couldn't refuse. A job that would launch my career, secure my future, and more importantly, help me build the life I'd always dreamed of. I left with high hopes, knowing that I was doing it for us. She was my everything, Ella. We had been together since high school. We were each other's first love. The kind of love you read about in books or see in movies. It was effortless. We'd spent hours talking about our future, about the house we would buy, the places we would visit, and the lives we would build. I knew it wasn't easy for her, but she supported me with every part of her being when I had to go. I promised her I would return soon. The first few months were tough, of course. I missed her more than I could say, and every night I would FaceTime her for hours, just to see her face, to hear her laugh. She'd tell me about her day, about the little things she did at work, about how she missed me. It felt like nothing had changed, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. I worked hard, my life consumed by deadlines and meetings, trying to save money and make the most of my time there. I didn't want to fail her. Every time I sent her a gift or a message, I imagined her smile, the way her eyes lit up when I said I loved her. She always reassured me that things were fine, that she was waiting for me. But after a year, I began to notice the distance between us, subtle at first. Her messages became less frequent. She'd say she was busy at work or out with friends. Sometimes she'd cut our video calls short, saying she was tired or had a lot to do the next day. My heart would sink each time, but I pushed it away. She had her own life, right? She was strong, independent. I trusted her. Then one evening, everything changed. I was sitting in my small apartment after a long day at work, scrolling through my phone. It was late, nearly midnight. I was about to message her when my phone buzzed. It was an unexpected call, one that I had not anticipated. It was her best friend, Sophie. She didn't usually call me. It was more of a text exchange thing, so the fact that she was calling immediately made my stomach churn with unease. "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" Sophie's voice was tight, hesitant. "Of course, what's wrong?" I asked, sensing the tension. "I don't know how to say this," Sophie started. "But Ella, she's been seeing someone else. Someone from her office." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the air leave my lungs, and for a moment, the world around me felt surreal, like I was floating above my own body, watching everything happen from a distance. "What do you mean?" My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I really am," Sophie said, her voice trembling. "But it's been going on for months. She didn't want anyone to know. I thought you should hear it from me." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The world spun around me. My mind raced, trying to process what I was hearing. Ella. My Ella. The girl I had trusted with everything. The girl I had loved more than anything. "Who is he?" I finally asked, my voice trembling. "His name's Jason. He works in her department. I don't know all the details, but I think you should talk to her," Sophie said, her voice full of regret. I didn't say anything after that. I hung up the phone, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of the world settle on my chest. My heart, the one that had been so full of love and hope just moments before, now felt like a hollow, aching thing. I couldn't believe it. Ella, the one person I thought would never hurt me, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I didn't sleep that night. The next day I booked a flight back home. I couldn't stay away any longer. I needed answers. I needed to understand how everything had gone so wrong. When I finally arrived home, the city felt different. It was like stepping into a place that used to be familiar but now was a foreign land. I called Ella, asking her to meet me. She didn't know I was back. I told her it was important that we needed to talk. She agreed to meet me at a cafe in the afternoon, and I arrived early, pacing in front of the building, trying to keep myself together. I was angry. I was heartbroken. But more than anything, I was terrified of what I might hear. When she walked in, I couldn't help but stare. She was beautiful as always, but there was something about her eyes, something distant, something I hadn't seen before. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," she said softly, sitting down across from me. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." "I know," she whispered. And for a moment, I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it quickly faded as she looked away. I took a deep breath, my hands clenched into fists on the table. "Sophie called me last night," I said, my voice low. "She told me everything, Ella, about you and Jason." Her face went pale and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The silence between us was suffocating, the weight of everything hanging in the air. "I don't know what to say," she finally said, her voice shaky. "I didn't want you to find out this way. I wanted to tell you, I didn't know how." "How long?" I asked, the words cutting through the air like a blade. 6 months, she whispered, looking down at her hands. It started off so innocently. At first, I didn't think it meant anything, but then it became more. I didn't know how to stop it, and I didn't want to lose you. I thought maybe I could keep it a secret and still have everything. "How could you do this to me?" My voice cracked. "I loved you, Ella. I gave everything to you, everything. I never wanted to hurt you," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I never meant for things to get this far." I looked at her, really looked at her, and all I could feel was emptiness. She was still the same Ella I had fallen in love with. But this version of her, this person who could betray me, like this, was someone I didn't recognize. "I don't know what to say either," I said quietly, pushing back the tears that were threatening to come. "I don't think I can ever trust you again, Ella. Not after this. Not after everything." And that was the moment I knew our love, the love I had worked so hard to preserve from afar, was gone. It wasn't just her actions that hurt me, though that was bad enough. It was the realization that she had lied to me, that I had been a fool. I had believed in something that wasn't real, and no matter how much I wanted to turn back time, I couldn't. I left the cafe that day, my heart heavier than it had ever been. She begged me to stay, to forgive her, but I knew deep down that it was over. When I boarded the plane back to finish my work abroad, I wasn't the same person I had been when I left. I had lost the person I thought I would spend my life with. And in a strange way, I had lost myself too. The journey of coming to terms with it took months. I didn't want to forgive her, not at first. But slowly, as I healed, I understood that sometimes love isn't enough. Trust is what holds it together. And once that's broken, everything falls apart. I still think about her sometimes. I still remember the good times we had. But I know now that they belong to another version of me, a version that doesn't exist anymore. And as for Ella, well, she's still with Jason. From what I hear, they're happy together. But I'm not sure if she ever truly understands the depth of the pain she caused. And maybe that's the hardest thing to accept. It all started one chilly autumn afternoon. I had just moved to this small town, trying to start fresh after a rough few months. I wasn't really looking for anything, let alone someone to fall in love with. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. I was at the local cafe, one of those cozy places with old wooden floors and the scent of freshly brewed coffee in the air. I had a latte in front of me, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I hadn't noticed her at first, not until she walked past my table. There was something about the way she carried herself, graceful, like she didn't have a care in the world. She was beautiful, but not in a way that screamed for attention. No, it was something quieter, something that made you stop and wonder if you had just seen something special, something rare. Her hair was dark, almost black, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and her smile, it was like the sun breaking through a cloudy day. For some reason, I couldn't take my eyes off her. I had never believed in love at first sight, but in that moment I felt it. I didn't know her name, but it didn't matter. It was as if the universe had pressed pause on everything else, just so I could notice her. My heart raced in a way I hadn't felt before, and I couldn't help but wonder who she was, where she came from, and how I might be lucky enough to know her. She ordered her drink at the counter, and as she turned to leave, our eyes met for just a second. She smiled, a small but genuine smile, and that was all it took. I couldn't help but smile back. I spent the next few days coming back to that cafe, hoping to see her again. And finally I did. This time I worked up the courage to talk to her. It wasn't much at first, just small talk about the weather. But it didn't take long before we found ourselves laughing, comfortable with each other in a way I hadn't felt in years. Her name was Emma, and she was everything I hadn't known I needed. We talked every day after that. I learned she was a writer, someone who lost herself in the world she created. She had this passion that was contagious, and I found myself hanging on every word she said. We spent hours together walking through the town, talking about everything and nothing. The connection between us felt like it was made of something deeper than just simple attraction. It was as if we had known each other for years, even though we had just met. Our relationship grew quickly. What started as casual coffee dates turned into late-night phone calls, dinners and weekends away. I couldn't believe how lucky I was to find someone like Emma. She was everything I ever wanted, kind, funny, intelligent, and, more than anything, she made me feel like I mattered. I started to fall for her, and it was terrifying how easy it was. It felt like she had captured my heart in a way I couldn't explain. But it was so real. I knew she felt it too. Then one evening, everything changed. I was sitting at home scrolling through my phone when I got a text from my friend Jake. We'd been friends for years, even before I moved to this town. He was one of those guys who always seemed to have his life together, charming, always surrounded by people, the kind of guy everyone liked. The message seemed innocent at first. He was just checking in, asking if I wanted to grab a drink the next day. But there was something off in his tone that I couldn't quite put my finger on. So I replied, and we agreed to meet up the next afternoon. I showed up at the bar, but Jake was already there, looking a little too comfortable. He didn't greet me with his usual enthusiasm. Instead, there was a strange tension in the air, like he was avoiding my eyes. "What's up, man?" I asked, trying to brush it off, but something felt wrong. Jake hesitated before taking a sip of his drink. "There's something I need to tell you," he said slowly. "I've been meaning to talk to you about it." I felt my heart race. My mind was already spinning, wondering what this was about. "Emma," he said, barely above a whisper. For a moment, I was confused. "What about her?" Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and I noticed how he was avoiding my gaze. I didn't want to hurt you, man, but I think you deserve to know the truth." My stomach dropped. My mind went blank, trying to make sense of his words. "Emma and we've been seeing each other." It was like the ground beneath me disappeared. I stared at him, unable to process what I had just heard. My heart was pounding in my chest, my thoughts swirling. "What do you mean, seeing each other? How long?" Jake looked guilty, but he didn't back down. "A few weeks now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, man. I never meant for it to happen like this. But it did, and I just couldn't keep it from you anymore." The world felt like it was crashing down around me. Emma, my Emma, the girl I had fallen for, the one who had made me feel like I was something special. She had been with him. She had been lying to me this whole time. I felt numb. I couldn't even process the betrayal. I just wanted to get out of there, to escape from everything. I stood up quickly, not even bothering to say goodbye to Jake. My head was spinning, my heart breaking. I couldn't believe it. I had trusted her. I had trusted him. I left the bar and walked aimlessly through the streets, not knowing where I was going or what I was supposed to do next. My thoughts kept flashing back to all the moments I had shared with Emma, the late nights, the laughter, the way she made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. All of it a lie. I didn't know what hurt more. The fact that she had been cheating on me with one of my closest friends, or that she had played me so perfectly, so convincingly. I couldn't bring myself to face her, not yet. Not when my heart was shattered into a million pieces. The next day I called Emma, but she didn't pick up. I left a message telling her that I needed to talk. But deep down I knew what the conversation would be. There was no excuse that could fix what had happened. She had betrayed me, and there was no going back. When she finally reached out, she seemed surprised, even a little confused. She didn't understand why I was upset. "It's not what you think," she said, but I couldn't listen anymore. The damage was done. I ended things with her right then and there. I couldn't keep holding on to something that was built on lies. But the worst part? I couldn't even bring myself to hate her, because as much as I wanted to, a part of me still loved her. I hated that I couldn't just switch it off, that I still cared despite everything. I didn't talk to Jake after that day. It was hard to even look at him the same way. How could I ever trust him again? I guess in the end, life has a way of throwing you curveballs. I had thought I found something real, something that could last. But instead I found myself broken and betrayed by the two people I trusted most. I don't know if I'll ever understand why it happened or if I'll ever trust again. It all started one day in the park, and I'll never forget how it happened. I was sitting there, lost in my own world, just minding my business. It wasn't anything special, just a regular afternoon. The kind where I like to sit in the park, with my sketch pad and try to capture the world around me. I wasn't expecting anything, to be honest. Just a few quiet hours with the hum of the city in the background. But then she walked by. I didn't notice her at first. I was too focused on drawing the curve of the tree in front of me, the way the branches seemed to stretch toward the sky like fingers. But something about her caught my eye. Maybe it was the way the sunlight hit, her hair or the rhythm of her steps. She was wearing a simple dress, but she looked effortless, like she'd stepped out of a dream. I couldn't stop staring, not in a creepy way, but in a way that made everything around me fade. It was like she had an aura, something I couldn't explain. But before I could get too lost in my thoughts, she looked up and our eyes met. For a second, everything stood still. It wasn't like in the movies where there's dramatic music and everything slows down. No, it was just a moment, a simple glance, but it felt like a spark. It wasn't fireworks or anything flashy, but I knew right then, without any words, that something had shifted. I didn't know what it was, but I felt it. I looked away quickly, embarrassed. What was I doing, staring at this stranger like that? But then, to my surprise, she smiled. Not just a polite smile, but one that made me feel like she'd seen me. Really seen me. I gathered up the courage to speak, although I wasn't sure what I was going to say. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Are you enjoying the day?" She stopped walking, and I could see her pause, as if deciding whether to keep moving or to respond. And then she answered, "Yeah, it's a beautiful day. The sun feels good, doesn't it?" Something about her voice made me smile, and we fell into an easy conversation. We talked about the weather at first, the typical small talk, but somehow it didn't feel awkward. It was like we were just two people, sitting there in the park without any pretense, sharing something simple and pure. She told me her name was Lily. I didn't catch all the details at first, but that name, Lily, stuck with me. It felt soft like her. We talked for a while, probably longer than either of us had planned. I found myself laughing more than I expected, my sketchpad forgotten at my feet. And before I knew it, the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over everything. It felt like we were in our own little world. As the conversation wound down, there was a moment where we just stood there, not quite sure how to say goodbye. I couldn't believe how natural it felt to be near her, how comfortable we were despite having just met. And then, out of nowhere, she said something that caught me off guard. "Do you come here often?" she asked, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. The question was so simple, but it made me realize something. I didn't want this to end. I didn't want to just leave the park and forget about the connection we'd made. "Yeah, I do. I come here whenever I need to clear my head," I said, hoping she'd catch my meaning. She smiled again, that same warm smile. "Maybe I'll see you around then," she said. "I like it here too." And just like that, she was gone. I stood there for a minute, watching her walk away, my heart racing. It was silly, really, but I felt like I had just met someone who could change everything. I didn't know how or why, but I felt it deep down in my chest. I didn't think much of it at first. People meet all the time, right? But then I kept going back to the park, hoping she'd be there. And sure enough, a few days later, there she was again. This time, she didn't just walk by, she stopped when she saw me. We sat together again, and it became a routine. Every week, we'd find time to meet there. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we'd just sit in silence, sharing the peace of the park. And over time, something between us grew. Something that wasn't just about chance meetings and idle conversations. Lily started to share things with me, things she hadn't told anyone else, and I found myself doing the same. We talked about our dreams, our fears, and everything in between. There was an ease between us, a trust that formed without us even realizing it. It was like we had been waiting to meet each other for so long, but neither of us knew it until that moment in the park. As the days passed, I realized I was falling for her, and I think she was falling for me too, though neither of us said it out loud. It wasn't that dramatic confession moment. It was something quieter, something that built slowly over time, like a steady tide that never rushed but always moved forward. One afternoon, after weeks of meeting like this, I found myself waiting for her at the park, my heart pounding. I had no idea how to say it, how to make it real, but I couldn't keep waiting any longer. When she showed up, I didn't waste any time. I took a deep breath and said, "Lily, I think I'm falling in love with you." She froze for a moment, her eyes wide, and then she smiled. That same smile that had made my heart skip the first time we met. "I think I am too," she said softly. And just like that, it felt like everything fell into place. We didn't rush into anything. We took our time learning about each other, building something that felt real, not just rushed. But I knew even then that I had found someone who meant more to me than I could ever have imagined. Lily wasn't just a passing moment in the park. She was the start of something, the beginning of a love story that would only grow stronger with each passing day. Now, whenever I go to that park, I always sit at the same spot where we first met. And every time I smile, knowing that the best things in life can come when you least expect them, just like she did. It was the beginning of the semester when I first saw her, sitting at the corner of the university cafe. I was running a little late for my study group, and I was in that rush mode, the one where you're just focused on getting to your destination, not really paying attention to anything around you. But then, for some reason, my eyes just drifted to her table. She was alone, her nose buried in a thick book, her hair falling messily around her face. There was something about her, something that drew me in immediately. I shrugged it off, though. People were always so wrapped up in their own world. I was just about to turn away when she glanced up as if she could feel my stare. Her eyes met mine for just a second, and then she gave me a small, quick smile. That moment seemed to stretch on forever, even though it was probably only a few seconds. I'm not sure why, but my heart raced a little. I told myself it was nothing, just a random moment. But the feeling stuck with me. The next week, we crossed paths again. It wasn't the same, though. This time, I was actually trying to make a point of finding her. I'm not proud of it, but I had to admit I was curious. I had this nagging feeling that there was something I should know about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't just about how she looked. There was something deeper. I felt like I knew her somehow, even if I didn't. So one day I took a deep breath and sat down at her table in the cafe. She didn't seem surprised, which was a little odd. Maybe she had noticed me before too. After all, it wasn't a big campus. And the cafe was one of the most popular spots for students to hang out. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm Alex. We've crossed paths a few times, and I thought maybe we could chat." She smiled again, that same quick knowing smile, and closed her book. "Sure," she said, her voice light, almost like she was expecting me to do this. "I'm Emily." It's funny how something as simple as a name can feel like the beginning of something more. We started talking about books mostly. She was into literature and so was I. But it quickly became clear that our interests were way more than just surface level. We talked about all sorts of things, our favorite authors, the things we loved to do in our spare time, the music we liked, the movies that shaped our views. It turned out we had a lot more in common than I ever imagined. As the weeks went on, we spent more and more time together. We met in the cafe almost every day, sometimes with a group, sometimes just the two of us. We discovered even more things we shared, our love for old films, hiking, and a deep interest in history. We both loved the same kinds of food, and we even found that we enjoyed the same quirky kind of humor. We'd sit and laugh for hours about random things, and I found myself looking forward to every moment with her. But here's the thing, I wasn't sure when it happened. It wasn't like one particular moment stood out and made me realize I was falling for her. It was more like a slow, steady thing, like the way the seasons change without you noticing until one day you look up, and everything's different. One day I realized I had become a little obsessed with our conversations, with her laugh, the way she smiled at me when we joked around. I found myself remembering things she said, little details like her favorite coffee order or how she liked to take long walks when she was stressed. I'd catch myself thinking about her when I wasn't around her, and that's when I knew. But I was scared. I mean, what if she didn't feel the same way? What if she was just being friendly and I was reading too much into it? I didn't want to ruin our friendship, and we had this perfect rhythm going. It was like a dance we both knew without even trying. One day, after a long study session, we were walking back to our dorms. The campus was quiet, and the evening sky was tinged with pink and orange from the setting sun. It was peaceful, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I felt a little nervous. "You okay?" she asked, glancing over at me with that familiar, warm smile. I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." It's been a long week. She laughed lightly. Tell me about it. I think I'm going to crash as soon as I get to my room. We walked in silence for a few moments, and then I felt a sudden urge to speak, something that had been bubbling inside of me for a while now. I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending like I didn't feel what I felt. Emily, I started, my voice a little shakier than I meant it to be. I've been thinking about something for a while. She turned to me, raising an eyebrow. Uh-oh, that sounds serious. I couldn't help but laugh. It was a nervous laugh, but it was genuine. I think I might like you, Emily, I said quietly, my heart pounding in my chest, like more than just a friend. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Her expression was unreadable, and I thought I might have messed everything up. But then she smiled again, and it was different this time. It wasn't just the friendly smile I was used to. It was something warmer, something softer. I think I like you too, Alex, she said, her voice just as quiet as mine. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was such a relief, but also thrilling. I couldn't stop grinning, and neither could she. We walked the rest of the way back to our dorms with the kind of happy silence that only happens when two people finally admit something they've both been secretly feeling. We didn't need to say much after that. Everything had already been said. That was the beginning of us. From that moment, we weren't just two students who shared interests. We were two people who had discovered something real between us. We spent the next months growing closer, learning more about each other, and falling even deeper in love. And somehow it felt like it had all started with that first simple smile in the cafe. It all started when she walked into the room. I know, that's a pretty cliche way to begin any love story. But trust me, it was like one of those moments where everything around you fades. And for just a second, it's like the universe hits the pause button. I didn't even know who she was at first. My best friend Ben had invited me over to his place for a small get-together. You know, nothing big, just a few people hanging out and chatting. I wasn't expecting anything special. But then she walked in. Ben introduced her as Lily, and I'm not sure what happened in that moment. But something in the back of my mind clicked. She had this effortless grace about her. Not in an overly glamorous way, just a quiet sort of beauty that made you want to pay attention. But it wasn't just that. It was the way she spoke, how she laughed, how she seemed so genuine, like there were no pretenses. I was never the kind of guy to believe in love at first sight. I always thought that kind of thing was reserved for movies or books. But there was something magnetic about her, something that made me want to get to know her. Still, I didn't want to look too eager or make things awkward. So I just played it cool and tried to be myself. The first time we actually spoke was when I was standing in the kitchen, pretending to look for something to eat. I was doing a terrible job of it, honestly, just stalling. Ben had introduced me to her, but it was more of a passing thing, you know? He didn't mention that Lily was actually new in town. She had just moved in, and I could tell she was still getting settled. We ended up talking about that, how she felt about the city, the new places she was trying to explore. I remember asking her if she had visited any parks yet, and she smiled, saying she didn't really know where to start. We talked about random things after that. Work, books, movies, music. It felt natural, like the conversation just flowed. I wasn't trying to impress her or anything. I was just having a conversation with someone who seemed interesting. But the more I talked to her, the more I found myself genuinely enjoying her company. I'm not sure when it happened, but somewhere between her telling me about her love of hiking and me, rambling on about my favorite music, I started realizing that I liked her more than I expected. Over the next few weeks, we started hanging out more, usually in group settings, but sometimes just the two of us. There was this subtle way we began to open up to each other. I found out she loved to paint, and I couldn't help but admire the way she spoke about it. It was clear she had a passion for it, and her eyes would light up whenever she talked about her work. She told me about how she would paint landscapes, nature, mostly, and I told her I'd never seen anyone as excited about nature as she was. I couldn't help but feel a spark every time we were together, but I didn't want to rush things. I wasn't the kind of guy who would confess my feelings after just a few casual conversations. I wanted to see if what I was feeling was real or just some passing infatuation. But honestly, the more we hung out, the more I realized this wasn't something fleeting. I found myself looking forward to our talks, to our time together. She was becoming a part of my routine, and it was something I didn't want to let go of. Then one night things changed. We were at a cafe. Ben was with us, but he had to leave early, so it was just the two of us. It felt like one of those rare moments where it was just right. We talked for hours, mostly about everything and nothing at all. It was simple, but something about that night felt different. Maybe it was the way she leaned in when she spoke, or how her laughter filled the space around us. Maybe it was how easy it felt to be around her, to be vulnerable without feeling judged. As the evening wore on, I found myself wanting to share more with her. Things I hadn't told anyone. My dreams, my struggles, my frustrations. And she listened, really listened. Not just with her ears, but with her whole presence. And she shared too. She told me about her fears, her hopes for the future. I could see the way she carried herself with quiet strength. But beneath that, there was a softness, a kindness, that made me want to protect her, to be there for her in ways I didn't even fully understand yet. It was that night that I realized I cared about her, more than I had let myself admit before. It wasn't just a passing thing. It was deep, but I wasn't sure if she felt the same way. So I decided to wait, to see if she would give me some sign. But there was nothing obvious. Nothing that screamed, "I like you too." The weeks that followed were a mix of excitement and confusion. We spent more time together, but I still couldn't tell what she was thinking. There were moments where I thought maybe she felt the same way, but there were also moments when I wondered if I was just reading too much into things. Then one evening, everything changed again. We were at a park sitting on a bench just watching the sunset. It was one of those peaceful moments when everything felt still, and it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Without thinking, I turned to her and said, "Lily, I like you. I really like you." She looked at me for a moment, her eyes wide. I could feel my heart racing and my stomach twisted in knots. Then she smiled, a real, genuine smile, and said, "I like you too." And in that moment, everything clicked. All the uncertainty, the doubts, the second guessing, it all vanished. She liked me too. The rest of the world seemed to fade away, and it was just the two of us, sitting on that bench, our hands brushing lightly. It felt like the start of something new, something real. We didn't rush into anything. We took our time, allowing the relationship to grow naturally. But from that day on, I knew that Lily was someone special. Someone who was becoming more than just a friend. She was someone I could see my future with. Looking back now, I can see how it all unfolded so gradually. We started as two strangers, then friends, and now we're more than that. I'm glad I took my time, that I didn't rush anything. Because what we have now feels solid, like it's built on trust and understanding. And every time I think about how we started, I smile, because it was real. It started like any ordinary day, or at least it seemed that way at first. I was just going about my business, finishing up some work at the coffee shop when I saw her for the first time. Her name was Lily. Beautiful, of course, but there was something more to her. It wasn't just the way her golden brown hair caught the sunlight, or how her blue eyes seemed to hold stories without saying a word. It was the way she moved through the world, as if she knew something deeper that I hadn't yet figured out. I didn't think anything of it, not at first. I was shy, always had been, and the idea of approaching someone like her seemed impossible. But the universe has a way of nudging things forward when it's time. That day she sat at the table next to mine, her hands shaking slightly as she unwrapped a piece of chocolate from her purse. Something about that motion, so delicate, almost fragile, struck me. I couldn't stop myself. I found the courage to strike up a conversation, and we talked for a while. Simple stuff at first, work, school, random thoughts on the weather, but I could tell she was holding something back. I didn't press her, though. Sometimes it's enough just to listen, even if there's nothing said aloud. We started seeing each other more often after that. Coffee shop visits, quiet walks around the park, random messages exchanged. It was all innocent at first, just the two of us finding our rhythm in the silence between words. Slowly, I began to notice the little things about her. The way she always laughed a little, too loud at the dumbest jokes, or how she would quietly disappear for a few moments when she thought no one was looking. But it wasn't until one night that I understood why. It was one of those nights when everything seemed to shift. I'd picked her up after her shift at the bookstore, and we were walking down the street toward her apartment when she froze, her hand trembling in mine. I turned to her, and there it was, a familiar look in her eyes that spoke volumes. Though she hadn't said a word, something was wrong. "I got a call," she said softly, her voice distant, as if the words had trouble reaching her lips. "My brother, he's gone." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, but I knew that was a lie. I couldn't promise that. So instead, I held her tight, just long enough to make sure she knew she wasn't alone. Her brother's death hit her like a tidal wave. They'd been close. She had always spoken of him with love, with admiration. To lose him, well, it was more than just losing a family member. It was losing part of herself, too. I watched as she crumbled, as the light in her eyes dimmed a little more each day. She shut herself off from everything, her friends, her family, even me at times. There were moments when she would sit alone in her room, her eyes hollow, her face pale. I could see it. The weight of the grief was suffocating. I didn't know what to do at first. How could I help her? What could I possibly say to take away her pain? The truth was, nothing I did would bring her brother back. But I promised myself that I'd stand by her. No matter how difficult things got, I wasn't going anywhere. I started small. I'd send her texts in the mornings. Simple things, memes to make her laugh, reminders that I was there if she needed me. Sometimes I'd show up with her favorite takeout, or even just a cup of tea to sit with her in the quiet. Sometimes I'd just hold her hand and let her cry. She didn't need me to fix anything. She just needed me to be there. Days passed and things didn't get easier. It wasn't a quick fix. I watched her go through all the stages, anger, confusion, sorrow, until eventually she started to let herself heal, little by little. There were days when she seemed like herself again, laughing at a joke, talking about something she loved. But there were also days when the sadness would come back like a storm, and I'd have to hold her through it all over again. One night, when I was sitting next to her on the couch, she said something that caught me off guard. "You don't have to stay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know it's hard. I don't want to drag you down." I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear of burdening me with her pain. But the truth was, I wasn't going anywhere. "I'm not going to leave you," I said, my hand finding hers once again. "This isn't about fixing you, Lily. It's about being here with you through it all. That's all I want. I'm here for as long as you need me." She didn't answer immediately, but I could see the tears welling up in her eyes again. I knew the pain wasn't gone, and it wasn't something that would disappear anytime soon. But I also knew that slowly, bit by bit, she was finding her way through the darkness, and I was right there beside her every step of the way. Months passed, and eventually the light started to return to her eyes. She began to talk more openly about her brother, telling stories of their childhood, memories of laughter and love. It was hard at first, but it was part of her healing process, and I was honored that she let me in, that she trusted me enough to share that part of her with me. One evening, as we stood together by the lake, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, she turned to me with a soft smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady now, no longer trembling, "for being here, for not leaving." I kissed her then, not out of pity, but because I realized just how deeply I cared for her. I had been there for her when she needed someone to lean on, but in the end, it was her strength that had carried her through the storm. I was just lucky enough to be there when she found it. We didn't have all the answers, and there would be more hard days ahead, but we had each other, and that was enough. In the end, that was all that mattered. And so we learned together. Healing wasn't something that happened overnight. It wasn't about forgetting the pain, but about finding a way to carry it with grace. I wasn't just standing by her side anymore. I was walking with her hand in hand, toward whatever the future held. And for the first time in a long time, I knew we'd be okay. It was a spring morning when I first saw her. I had decided to take this trip alone, not really caring where I was going. Just somewhere to escape the routine, to breathe fresh air, and hopefully find something to break the monotony of everyday life. I wasn't expecting much, just the usual touristy stuff. The crowds, the sunburns, and the endless selfies. But then I saw her. I was sitting on a bench in this quiet little square in a town that I didn't even know the name of, watching the people pass by, sipping my coffee, trying to avoid thinking about anything important. That's when she walked past, her laughter carrying through the air, like music that made everything around me stop for a second. I should have kept my eyes down, kept my head buried in my phone, but there was something magnetic about her. She had this kind of easy grace, the way she moved. She wasn't in a hurry like the others. It was like she was floating, absorbed in her own world. I couldn't help but stare, and then she turned, catching my eye. And in that instant, I felt like I had been caught in something that I didn't understand. something I had no control over. She smiled, and I smiled back, unsure of what to do with myself. "Hi," she said, her voice light, a little playful. "What's a tourist doing sitting here all alone?" I could feel my heart racing. I didn't want to seem like an awkward mess, but all I could think about was how surreal this moment felt, how easy it was for her to speak to me, like we had known each other forever. "Just soaking it all in," I said, trying to sound casual. "You're here on vacation too?" she asked, stepping closer. I nodded, grateful that I wasn't stammering. Yeah, just needed to get away. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "From what?" "Life, I guess," I said, a little more honestly than I had planned. "The usual. Work, responsibilities. I just needed to breathe." She nodded, and I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "I get that. I'm doing the same thing. It's nice to be somewhere new, isn't it?" I couldn't help but agree. I had been to so many places, but this town, this moment, felt like the start of something new. It felt like I was talking to someone who understood without needing to ask. We talked for hours. The conversation flowed easily between us, about the sights we'd seen, about our favorite books, our favorite songs. I told her about how I loved to hike, how I had a soft spot for Italian food, and how I always dreamed of learning a new language. She laughed at my jokes, and I found myself doing the same. For some reason, she made me feel comfortable in a way I didn't even know was possible. By the time the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, we found ourselves walking side by side, like we had always been doing it. We didn't rush, just wandered through the winding streets, exploring this small town like it was a secret world, one that only we knew about. She talked about her dreams, about how she wanted to travel the world, to experience every culture, every language. Her eyes would light up when she spoke of places she wanted to visit, and I could feel that same spark inside of me, a hunger to see more, do more. That night we ate dinner at a small outdoor cafe, talking about everything and nothing. I could tell she was different from everyone I had met before. There was a quiet strength about her, but also an openness, a willingness to let me see parts of her that she probably didn't show others. As the evening wore on, I realized I had forgotten what it felt like to connect with someone so completely. There was no pressure, no expectations, just the two of us, sharing this moment, letting it unfold in its own way. The next morning, she was waiting for me at the same cafe where we had met. I had been half expecting it to be some kind of dream, a passing connection that would fade as quickly as it had come. But she was there, smiling at me as if nothing had changed, like we hadn't just shared a night that felt like a beginning. From that moment on, we were inseparable. We explored every corner of the town, talked about everything under the sun, and laughed until our cheeks ached. It was simple, but in the best way. She showed me how to see the beauty in small moments, how to enjoy the quiet simplicity of life. Days turned into weeks, and though our time together was limited by the fact that we were both tourists in this foreign place, I couldn't deny the growing feelings between us. The chemistry was undeniable, but it wasn't just physical, it was deeper, something that felt like it was meant to happen. One evening, as we sat by a lake, the last light of the day reflecting on the water, I turned to her. The words felt like they had been building inside of me, wanting to be said for so long. "Do you think it's possible to fall in love with someone this quickly?" I asked, my voice low, uncertain. She looked at me, her eyes full of the same emotion that had been growing between us. "I don't know," she said softly, her hand brushing against mine. "But I think it's happening." In that moment, I knew. It wasn't just the magic of the place, the thrill of newness, or the fleeting nature of our connection. It was something real, something that went beyond timing, beyond circumstances. But reality always catches up. We both knew that our time together was running out. The trip would end. We would go back to our separate lives, our separate worlds. But for that brief, perfect moment, I didn't care. Because in her eyes, I saw a love that wasn't bound by time or place. It was something that felt timeless, like a story we had already started writing. So, when the time came for us to part ways, we promised each other that it wasn't the end. That love, our love, wasn't bound by this town, this trip. And even though we didn't know where it would go, or if it would survive the distance, we knew that what we had was special, something we would carry with us forever.